I never believed in forbidden rooms. Jujutsu High had its fair share of dark corners, doors that creaked when they shouldn't, and whispers that crawled under your skin. But I never bought into the whole "some places should remain untouched" superstition. That was until I found it, the room that shouldn't exist. It was hidden in the farthest wing of the school, behind what looked like a storage closet, a door with no label, no knob, just a faint sliver of white light escaping through the cracks. Something in my gut screamed at me to walk away. Instead, I pushed. The door opened without resistance, revealing a space that wasn't right. It was too vast, too empty, yet it hummed with something alive. Faint symbols lined the walls, shifting like ink dissolving in water. And in the very center, standing alone, was a name glowing faintly on a stone tablet. Gojo Satoru. The moment my eyes landed on it, my head throbbed. Memories I never knew I had flooded in, a blinding white infinity, a smile sharper than any curse, a voice dripping with arrogance, yet carrying unbearable warmth. And then, everything shattered. I stumbled back out of the room, gasping for air. The school hall was the same, yet different. The very air felt thinner, stretched, like an old film reel skipping frames. Students passed by me, their faces unfamiliar, their conversations hollow. "Are you okay?" Megumi's voice snapped me back. I turned to him, my pulse pounding. "Gojo Satoru, he..." My tongue felt heavy, like the words themselves resisted being spoken. "Do you remember him?" Megumi's expression didn't change. It was blank. Too blank. "Who?" "Gojo, our teacher, the strongest. White hair, blindfold." Megumi's brows furrowed, as if he were trying to decipher a language he had never heard. "I don't know what you're talking about." I felt sick. I rushed to the faculty office, flipping through student records, mission logs, faculty lists. Nothing. Every file had been rewritten. There was no mention of him, as if he had never existed. My heart pounded as I grabbed the first-year registry, my breath hitching when I saw my own name. Yuji Itadori, student Megumi Fushiguro, student Nobara Kugisaki, student no Gojo Satoru. No mention of his clan, his legacy, nothing. I ran outside. The sky above was wrong. It wasn't blue, wasn't gray. It was white, vast and endless, a blank canvas stretching into infinity. The clouds swirled like a vortex, their forms flickering between shapes I couldn't comprehend. Then I saw it. People's faces, teachers, students, even random pedestrians began to blur. Their features melted, twisted, until all of them had the same hauntingly familiar grin. Their eyes covered by something that wasn't fabric, but the idea of fabric. Gojo's face. I stumbled back, my mind screaming. The world around me flickered like a broken screen. Buildings stretched, warped, collapsing into themselves, only to rebuild again in an instant. My own hands trembled, my fingertips phasing in and out of existence. "You weren't supposed to remember?" The voice was everywhere, nowhere. A low hum vibrating through the very fabric of reality. I turned. The door to the forbidden room had vanished, replaced by an expanse of white nothingness. A limitless void, spreading, consuming, rewriting. And in its center, an outline of a man, tall, grinning, eyes hidden by an abyss that should not exist. Gojo Satoru was never here, yet the world itself was breaking because of it. The moment I blinked, the world jumped. I was still standing in the courtyard, but something had shifted. It was subtle, like a puzzle piece jammed into the wrong slot. The trees loomed taller, their shadows stretching unnaturally. The air was thick, heavy, humming with static. "Yuji, are you okay?" Megumi asked again, but his voice was wrong, like it had been compressed, distorted. I stepped back. My heart pounded. You're not real." His face twitched. His pupils dilated, then constricted unnaturally fast. The world around us blurred, like ink running in water. I turned and ran. The hallways of Jujutsu High were no longer familiar. Walls stretched endlessly. Doors multiplied, shifting locations when I wasn't looking. Footsteps echoed, mine, but also someone else's. A presence unseen, watching. I turned a corner and slammed straight into someone. A firm grip caught my wrist before I could fall. "You shouldn't be here." Shoko Ieri. Her face was pale, her usual nonchalance replaced with something closer to fear. But it wasn't me she was afraid of. It was the air around us. "Shoko," my voice cracked. "Tell me you remember Gojo." She inhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around my wrist. A flicker of recognition crossed her eyes, then pain, deep and raw. "You need to leave," she whispered. "The moment you saw his name, you became part of this." "Part of what? What is happening?" Her eyes darted past me. A shadow loomed at the end of the hallway. It wasn't a person, wasn't a curse. It was a gap, a tear in the fabric of reality itself. Through it, I could see glimpses of something impossible. Fragments of fights that never happened, moments frozen in time. And in all of them, he was there. "Gojo isn't dead. He isn't alive either," Shoko murmured. "He's displaced, erased, but not gone. But the world remembers. And it's trying to fix the paradox." The lights flickered. The walls cracked, splitting open like wounds. The air pressure dropped, and suddenly everything became too bright. Shoko shoved me back. "Go before it finds you, before he finds you." The shadow lunged. A void, a splitting headache. And then I woke up gasping. In my dorm room, the morning sun streamed through the window. A dream? Number? My hands were still shaking, my head still ached. And outside, the sky was still white. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I didn't want to, but because I physically couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, my body refused to shut down, like I was running on a never-ending current of adrenaline, even though I felt like I was dying from exhaustion. I sat up in bed, rubbing my temples. Outside, the world was too still. No birds chirped, no wind blew. The distant sounds of the city, cars, voices, life, had been smothered, replaced with a faint, nearly imperceptible hum, the static of a world trying to correct itself. I grabbed my phone, fingers trembling. The messages were wrong. Nobara, 5:32 a.m. "You coming to class?" I frowned. That didn't make sense. Nobara never woke up before noon unless she had to, and the timestamp, it was wrong. My phone's clock said 3:07 a.m. I hesitated before typing a response. "Me, are you awake?" The reply was instant. "Nobara, you coming to class?" My breath hitched. My fingers hovered over the screen. "Me, what class?" This time no response came, just 3 dots blinking, typing, but never sending. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and made my way to the window. The sky was still white, vast and endless, like an unfinished painting. The cityscape stretched out before me, but something about it felt off. Buildings flickered, not in an obvious way, but subtly, like an image shifting between 2 slightly different versions of itself. Details rearranged when I wasn't looking directly at them. I swallowed hard. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing across the street. Tall, white hair, a blindfold covering his eyes. I spun around, my pulse spiking, and he was gone. No footsteps, no trace. just a lingering presence, like the air itself had held its breath. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. My breathing was uneven. I wasn't insane. The world was breaking. I threw on a hoodie and bolted out of my dorm, my mind racing. I needed answers. Shoko had known something. She had remembered, even if only for a moment. If anyone could help me piece this together, it was her. The halls were empty as I ran. Too empty, like the school had been abandoned overnight. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, the sound stretching too long, repeating even after I had stopped moving. I reached the infirmary and yanked the door open. Shoko was there, sitting at her desk, flipping through a folder, casual, normal. But the second she looked up at me, her entire body stiffened. "You're still here," she muttered. Not a question, a realization. "You remember?" I gasped, shutting the door behind me. She exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. "I told you to leave." "I can't," I snapped. "I don't even know what's happening. The sky is wrong. People are glitching, and I saw him." Her eyes darkened. "Where?" "Outside. Just for a second. But I know it was him." My voice dropped. "Shoko, he's not gone. And whatever they did to erase him, it's not working." Shoko ran a hand through her hair, muttering something under her breath. She stood up, pacing. "They didn't just erase him. They erased his concept." I froze. "What?" She grabbed a cigarette, lit it with shaking hands. "Satoru Gojo isn't just a person. He's a force. A cornerstone of the balance in this world. His power, his existence. It was like a pillar holding everything together. When they tried to remove him completely, the world lost a fundamental law." I swallowed hard. "And now it's trying to fix itself." The lights flickered. A cold chill swept through the room. And then the door behind me creaked open. We both turned. There was no one there, just an empty hallway. But the floor outside was no longer solid. It stretched into a vast white void. And from that void, footsteps echoed, slow, measured. A voice followed, smooth and amused, yet carrying an edge of something unfathomable. "Ah, you weren't supposed to notice me just yet." Shoko's cigarette slipped from her fingers. I turned, my heart hammering. A silhouette stood just beyond the threshold, backlit by the endless white. Grinning, Gojo Satoru was walking back into the world. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, that endless white void, that flickering distortion of the world where Gojo Satoru had once existed. By morning, the sky was still the same, blank white, a glaring reminder that reality itself was unraveling. I needed answers, and the only person who had given me even a shred of truth was Shoko. I found her in the medical wing, sitting at her desk, a cigarette burning between her fingers. But something was different this time. Her eyes were tired, bloodshot, like she had spent the entire night fighting against something. She didn't look surprised when she saw me. "You came back," she murmured, taking a slow drag. I clenched my fists. "Tell me what's happening. No more half-truths, no more warnings. Just tell me." Shoko exhaled smoke, watching it curl through the stagnant air. "You won't like the answer." "I don't care." She sighed and leaned back. "The world is compensating for an absence that shouldn't exist. Gojo Satoru was a constant, a force so overwhelming that reality itself had to account for him. And now that he's gone, there's a hole. A paradox." She tapped her cigarette against the ashtray. "Do you know why you're the only one who remembers him?" I swallowed. I hadn't thought about that, not really. I had assumed it was because I saw his name, but was that really it? Shoko studied my face, then said, "It's because you were chosen to remember." A chill ran down my spine. Chosen by who? She hesitated, then glanced at the door. Not by who. By what? The room dimmed. The shadows in the corners stretched unnaturally, curling toward us like ink bleeding across paper. I felt it before I saw it. The pressure, the suffocating weight of something unseen, something watching. Shoko stood abruptly. "We don't have much time." The walls groaned. The door behind me flickered. No, not flickered. It was duplicating, shifting between two different states. Open, closed, there, not there. Then, "You're getting too close." The voice wasn't Shoko's. It wasn't mine. It came from everywhere and nowhere. A distorted, layered voice that sent ice through my veins. I turned slowly. A figure stood in the doorway, tall, dressed in black, his face obscured by bandages. No, not bandages. A void, a swirling abyss where eyes should be. But the smile was familiar. Shoko grabbed my arm. "Run!" I didn't hesitate. We bolted down the hallway, the air warping around us. Doors stretched, hallways twisted into spirals that shouldn't exist. The building itself was changing, and behind us, footsteps, slow, measured, unstoppable. "Where are we going?" I gasped. Shoko's grip tightened to the only place left that remembers him. The walls cracked, and the world broke. The world could no longer contain the lie. Everything around me was unraveling. Walls flickered between existing and not. People's faces twisted, their voices overlapping in a chorus of forgotten memories. And at the center of it all stood Gojo Satoru. He smiled, but it wasn't a smile. It was a fracture in reality itself. "You wanted the truth, Yuji?" His voice resonated in my bones. "Then let's rewrite everything." White infinity consumed the world, and then I understood. Gojo Satoru was never meant to be erased. The paradox collapsed. The world shattered. And when I opened my eyes again, he was back, smiling, real. But something was different. Something had changed forever. The end